All right. Let's go ahead and call the Senate to order. Sergeant Arms will please secure the chamber doors. Members, please take your seats. As we have some stragglers joining us here. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President,
All right, Senators, we are very pleased to be joined today by Reverend Dr. Milton N. Lemon of Community Baptist Church of Patapsco Park in Brooklyn, Maryland, guest of the distinguished senator from the 44th District. Please rise for the invocation.
Most holy, eternal, merciful, faithful, and sovereign God, our Heavenly Father, as the Senate session of the state of Maryland begins, I stand before you to lift these senators up in prayer. And according to 1 Timothy chapter 2, we are told to pray for those in authority, and therefore I ask your blessing on them both, individually and collectively. Bless them to the work together in unity to your glory and for our common good. Grant them wisdom to make wise and good decisions as leaders in our state of the United States of America, the land of the free, the home of the brave. Again, I ask your blessing on these senators and all who serve in this body, that today and every day they will work faithfully according to the best of their ability. This I ask thee in your magnificent name, the name that is the name above every name. Thank you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. That's wonderful. Perfect. Thank you. That's great. All right. Yes, recognizing the senator from District 12.
Thank you, Mr. President. Really pleased to be able to recognize our speaker this evening, the Reverend Dr. Milton Lemon from Community Baptist Church in our district in Northern Anne Arundel County. He's been a phenomenal community leader in the Pumphrey area and done so much along with his congregation to support the local neighborhood up there, and really just wanted to thank him for those wonderful words of greetings this evening, and ask that the pastor's remarks be journalized tonight.
Without objection, certainly we will journalize the pastor's remarks. I was wondering, I saw Brooklyn Park, and so I was guest of 44, and I was getting confused about my geography here. This makes much more sense now. This, yes, it is the good senator's pastor. Wonderful. All right. Has everyone recorded their presence in the chamber? It appears so. The clerk will take the call. With 39 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now yet again in session. Let's see, do we have any introductions? Senator from 25th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, as you guys know, we're celebrating an amazing day with MLK Day, but I also have my guest because there's no school and we're celebrating MLK Day. So I have my children here today, young Nicholas Charles and my daughter, Brent Charles. Rise up, guys. Thank you, Mr. President.
Welcome, welcome. Excellent. It's great to have you. Yes, Senator from Baltimore County.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wanted to make certain to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Ralph Johnson, who was one of my faculty advisors while I was at Johns Hopkins University. He's also the reason why I became an ALP.
Wonderful. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here tonight. Thank you. Senator from the 45th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. My colleague walked over and said that all the buttons on my shirt had popped. And I thought that he was trying to tell me I was gaining weight, but he said that I look very proud. So colleagues, today it's been a while since she's joined us on this floor, but let me be clear, I try my best to embarrass her every time I get a chance. Today I'm joined by my daughter, Kennedy McCrae, obviously daughter of Baltimore City, proud student of Baltimore City Polytechnic Institute. You guys would, in the Ingenuity program, thriving with a 4-point-something grade point average throughout her 4 years from that space, Mr. President. First in doubles and tennis for all Baltimore City schools from that standpoint. So if you guys can, give a round of applause to my daughter, Kennedy Corey McCrae.
Welcome, Kennedy, amongst all of our pages. We'll have our pages introduction here very shortly, but he said he's going to put you to work this week, so, so we'll see. We'll see. Why don't we do pages now? Recognizing the co-chair of the Protocol Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I guess the senator from Baltimore City stole my thunder earlier. So we have another round of pages this week. Let's start with Trinity Barnhill from Prince George's County, a resident of District 26 and a student at Friendly High School. Next, we have Julia Gore from Wicomico County, District 38, a student at Parkside High School. Grace Hollingsworth from Washington County, District 2, a student at North Hagerstown High School. Liliana Katz-Hollander from Montgomery County, District 18, a student at Richard Montgomery High School. Jasheen Kaur from Montgomery County, District 39, a student at Clarksburg High School. And of course, Kennedy McCrae from Baltimore City, District 45, a student at Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. And then last, Asiri Prasad from Frederick County, District 4, a student at Lignor High School.
Welcome to all of our
back.
pages. We're going to have a fun week this week, so thank you all for being here with us today on this MLK Day. We had a nice event earlier today. Let's see, do we have any other introductions? Two quick notes. We had quite the weekend for the Commanders fans. Big time, very big day for the Commanders fans. Big day for our majority leader, sadly, who is a Buffalo Bills fan. We won't hold that against her. Those of us who are Ravens fans are still in a bit of mourning today. We're trying to get it all off. That's right. Well, the good news is we can all be Bills fans to beat the Chiefs next week, right? That's I think that's a fair take. I do want to make one quick note that I promised myself last night that I would make. Yesterday we had the joy of taking our kids to Round Top up in Pennsylvania, and we left in the afternoon. And we left around, I don't know, probably just about 3:45, 4 o'clock. But at the time, it was, if anybody was watching the Eagles game, you could sort of see the snow coming down. That was what 83 looked like coming down from Round Top. And so it was about 40 miles on 83 and then another kind of, I think it's like 50 miles down through Maryland. The 40 miles that were from Round Top to the county or to the state line were some of the most treacherous driving I've ever had in my entire life. I mean, it was like nothing had been touched. It was cars spinning out on 83, going 20 miles an hour. It was insane. I'm not kidding. The moment we hit the Maryland line, it was like everything was cleared. It was gone. And it was one of those moments that thought like, yes, I know we're high cost at times, but, when it really matters, in the midst of stuff, our public service workers, they show up, they do the job, they clear the roads, and it was like night and day between driving through Pennsylvania to the moment we hit Maryland, and it was just clear sailing. It was pretty amazing. So I want to say thank you to MDOT and to State Highway and all of their great work. Truly, it was remarkable. It was remarkable. So, yes. All right. Let's see. Do we have any other introductions before we jump into the work? We're very excited to have our Martin Luther King Day speech today from the Senator from 44th, but we want to get through our work first. Let's do that. So be considered the reading of the journal from the prior legislative day. We have the introduction of Senate bills. This is calendar number 13. Clerk will read the bills.
Senate Bill 396, Senator McKay, Public Safety
Majority Leader moves, so
Officer.
be considered the reading of the bills. We'll go to the Senate bond initiatives, calendar 7. Clerk will read the bond initiatives.
Number 1, Senator McKay, Archway Station, Budget and Taxation. Number
Majority Leader
2,
moves, so be considered the reading of the bond initiatives. They will be referred to the Capital Budget Subcommittee. We have 3 announcements. Let's take up the first announcement.
In accordance with Rule 33D, the following legislation has been reassigned as indicated below. Senate Bill 379, Senator M. Washington, State Board of Social Work Examiners, reassigned to Finance.
All right, bill will be reassigned to finance. Next is another announcement. Clerk will read the announcement.
In accordance with Rule 33D, the following legislation has been reassigned as indicated below. Senate Bill 358, Senator King, Maryland Deaf Culture Digital Library, Funding and Budget, reassigned to Budget and Taxation.
All right, clerk will read the final announcement.
In accordance with Rule 33D, the following legislation has been reassigned as indicated below. Senate Bill 385, Senator Love, Vehicle Laws, Injury or Death of Vulnerable Individual, reassigned to Judicial Proceedings.
Excellent. All right, those three bills are now reassigned to their appropriate standing committees. We're gonna pause there on the work so that we can move forward with tonight's presentation. Before we do the presentation, let's get out any announcements for tomorrow. Any announcements for finance tomorrow morning? No. AAA, B&T, Judicial Proceedings, Democratic Caucus. Chair of the caucus.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Senate Democratic Caucus will be meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the majority caucus room in person.
Excellent. Thank you. Minority Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Republican Caucus will be meeting at 8:30 p.m., and we look forward to seeing everyone there and celebrating the new presidency of President Donald Trump.
All right. Excellent. All right. Any further announcements? We have standing committees, joint committees, select committees? Nope. All right. In that case, that will conclude our official business for the day. We are very, very pleased. The senator from the 44th District has been working, we talked about this a year ago and how quickly a year passes. He spent this year really reading a number of books, I'm sure he will mention, preparing for this speech, and I'm truly excited to hear his reflections and thoughts on this important day, and would like to welcome the senator from the 44th District up to provide remarks.
There we go. All right. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank our president for inviting me to do this address for this year's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Some were mentioned earlier, some guests were certainly introduced, but I wanted to make certain to introduce my family that's here this evening, while my mother could not join us but is out in cyberspace watching us. I have my wife, Amara Sidnor, my mother-in-law, my father, and my three daughters, and you had an opportunity to get the prayer this evening from my father-in-law. So it was mentioned that I read 13 or so books. I read a number of books, but certainly read a number of articles in preparation for tonight's speech. And many of you know, when I was an undergrad, I was a history major. So doing this was really exciting for me because I got to learn a lot about Martin Luther King, many things that I did not know. So it's an honor to be able to address you all here this evening to talk about Dr. King's legacy. But I also wanted to make certain that I thanked DLS's librarian, Sandra Mueller, who helped me to gather a variety of legislative records. So when contemplating my address, I wondered what I could share about one of our country's most well-documented persons of faith. 2 months before his death, and during the Drum Major Instinct sermon, Dr. King instructed us, when remembering him, not to mention where he went to school, nor his Nobel Peace Prize, nor his 300 or 400 other awards, because to him those things were not important. So in obedience, I will not mention any of those things this evening. Instead, as we sit here in the twilight hours of today's holiday, I want to share the historical journey around Maryland's celebration of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So we lost Dr. King on April 4th, 1968, when he was felled by an assassin's bullet.
Throughout this nation, many mourned. Here in Maryland, that same day, our governor and former Baltimore County Executive Spiro Agnew noted, in part, that he shared the shock of the nation upon learning of the killing of Dr. King. He continued, "Words at a time like this are inadequate to express the overwhelming horror of this senseless act. I can only say that I extend my deepest sympathy to the family of Dr. King." The next day, he sent a telegram to Mrs. King, sharing this sentiment with her and saying that the people have lost a strong voice of reason and hope at a critical time in our history. Within days of his assassination, U.S. Representative John Conyers and Senator Edward Brooke introduced bipartisan federal legislation to declare Dr. King's birthday a federal holiday. The introductions of the legislation were among the first acts that will culminate into the holiday that we celebrate today. State legislators acted as well. What I call this holiday legislation, it was signed into law by the governors of Connecticut and Illinois in 1973, and Massachusetts on July 8, 1974, making them among the first states to recognize this holiday in some manner. But what about Maryland? With years of community advocacy and the working of many legislators, Maryland actually was among the first states in the nation to honor Dr. King by declaring his birthday an official holiday. Now, the legislative journey of recognizing this holiday is a prime example of incrementalism that we all know very well, right? For 6 sessions, legislation was introduced in Maryland to recognize Martin Luther King Day on January 15th, his birthday, as a legal holiday, and that's which is most similar to the holiday that we celebrate today. But remember, we're here on the 20th, not the 15th. So our story begins during that fall of 1969 when the Maryland State Teachers Association adopted a resolution urging Governor Agnew to set aside a day each year to focus on the importance of human rights. Prior to resigning as governor to transition into his new position as a U.S. Vice President, Governor Agnew complied and proclaimed January 15th as Human Rights Day in Maryland. The proclamation stated, in part, that all citizens should recognize the many stresses that tend to divide our nation, and he encouraged school and professional education organizations to plan activities on the 15th to promote goodwill among all citizens. While deserved, the proclamation fell well short of celebrating Dr. King. However, a few days later, on January 21st, Delegate Isaiah Dixon Jr. and Senator Clarence Mitchell III, both of Baltimore, introduced the first pieces of legislation recognizing January 15th as a legal holiday to be known as Martin Luther King Jr. Day. While Delegate Dixon's bill didn't proceed, Senator Mitchell's bill made it to this floor, this Senate floor, where he amended his own bill to require memorial observances in schools rather than the holidays initially sought because he didn't have the support to pass the bill as introduced. One senator lamented, "I don't think this gentleman has served good enough for this nation." Noting that Dr. King espoused the principle of civil disobedience, he continued, "Anyone who's going to defy the law is not entitled to be recognized by this state." Nevertheless, Senator Mitchell's bill passed in the Senate, 37-3. However, our state's first efforts to codify this holiday honoring Dr. King ultimately died in the House. The following January, Governor Marvin Mandel, like his predecessor, proclaimed January 15th as Human Rights Day in Maryland, and Delegate Dixon reintroduced his legislation. Now, the record's not clear. I don't believe there was any introductions from the Senate side anymore after this, after the first introduction in '69. An editorial in the Afro-American newspaper critiqued Mandel, stating that he reacted like an overly cautious politician rather than a high-minded statesman. About the same time, one of Dr. King's closest advisors, Bayard Rustin, published an op-ed in the Afro, noting in part The most obvious reason for creating this holiday is to pay honor to Dr. King and to the principles for which he lived and died. As the leader of what has come to be called the Second American Revolution, Dr. King achieved a stature comparable to that of our founding fathers. Rustin argued that this holiday would pay homage to Dr. King and to the values for which he lived and died. Rustin further stated how Dr. King made the first American Revolution whose principles of equality and liberty were marred by the Three-Fifths Compromise. Leading a movement and articulating its most profound desires, Rustin said that for this reason alone, he deserves to be honored by this entire nation. Unfortunately, Delegate Dixon's legislation did not pass. So the next session in 1971, on January 13th, about 75 to 100 community members, including clergy and students from the Key School and Annapolis Senior High School, assembled that afternoon outside the State House steps for what Reverend and later Delegate Wendell Phillips called a very fitting tribute to Dr. King, and it was sponsored by the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance. Advocates delivered a petition with about 2,000 signatures intended for Governor Mandel, but it was delivered to William Atkins, a member of the state's Human Relations Commission. The petition expressed the community's desire for both the General Assembly and Congress to make Dr. King's birthday a legal holiday. Now, according to Carl Snowden, a teenager at the time, and I believe Mr. Snowden, is he here? We saw him earlier. He was a member of a Truth and Soul member, and he said that Mr. Atkins told the marchers that the governor would give the petition his careful and conscientious attention. In fact, Governor Mandel expanded upon the 1970 proclamation and proclaimed January 15th not simply Human Rights Day, as he did before, but Martin Luther King Human Rights Day. As he did in the prior two sessions, Delegate Dixon reintroduced the same legislation to establish January 15th as that legal holiday. But Governor Mandel, while praising the civil rights leader as a great man, said that there were already too many state holidays. I know some of you have heard that before. I see Senator, no, I won't say, I was about to say your name. We've heard this before, right? He said holidays were costly to state government and the public at large, signaling the likely fate of Delegate Dixon's legislation for the session. He would not be the first to raise costs as a concern for enacting this legislation. Here in the Senate, while legislation was not introduced by any member, Senators Welcome, Abrams, Burns, Curran, Lapidus, Blount, and Dalton introduced, and this body passed, Senate Resolution 4, honoring Dr. King's legacy on January 15th. Likely taking a cue from the governor's comments, on March 17th, Delegate Dixon's bill was reported out of Ways and Means and amended to establish that the third Sunday in January was going to be Martin Luther King Day, and to provide that that day shall be a day of prayer in honor of Martin Luther King. Delegate Kenneth Webster, who was one of the co-sponsors of this legislation, lamented that this is just the kind of thing that Dr. King fought against, believing that the amended bill's passage was simply a form of tokenism. Nevertheless, the General Assembly passed Delegate Dixon's bill on April 2nd, and it was signed into law May 24th, 1971. While this was the first piece of legislation to pass our General Assembly in remembrance of Dr. King, this legislation did not create a legal holiday. Needless to say, Delegate Webster did not believe the work was complete. So the following session in 1972, Delegate Webster took up the mantle and introduced legislation to repeal the prior year's law and establish the 15th as that holiday. His bill was ultimately amended, and when it passed, it read, "The 15th day of January of each and every year shall be proclaimed by the governor as Martin Luther King Day, and shall be a day of prayer in honor of Martin Luther King." Now, this legislation was signed into law on May 5th, and it achieved the goal of recognizing Dr. King on the 15th, but it still fell short of it being a legal holiday. Delegate Webster did not give up. The following session on February 2nd, 1973, Delegate Webster again introduced legislation to repeal the prior session's law and to establish January 15th as that legal holiday. His legislation was referred to Ways and Means and ultimately did not pass. In a 2009 interview with the Baltimore Sun, Delegate Webster recalled the struggle to get Dr. King's birthday recognized as a legal holiday. He shared that while he served on Ways and Means, the Ways and Means Committee, the chair, Delegate Ben Cardin, kept telling him, there ain't no money. We can't. And Delegate Webster retorted, there ain't no such thing as we can't. It's we won't. During the 1974 session, Delegate Webster attempted a third time to have this legislation passed, introducing House Bill 320. Ways and Means debated dropping Defenders Day from Maryland's legal holiday, but ultimately agreed not to remove it and reported Delegate Webster's bill out without change. But things got very interesting when the bill made its way to the House floor. Despite the fact that the members of the General Assembly are expected to vote when we are on the floor, during the initial vote, so many delegates abstained that the bill died 71 to 24, one vote shy of passage. This included a few delegates from Montgomery and Prince George's County's delegations, and the Sun reported 11 East and South Baltimore delegates took a walk. Delegate Webster moved to reconsider the vote. The Washington Post reported that several of the House's 12 black members urged their non-voting colleagues to vote for the bill. Additionally, 2 Baltimore County delegates rose in support of the legislation as well. While urging his colleagues to reconsider the first vote, Delegate Rind stated, it's about time we honor someone who's important to all Americans, not because he's black, but because he is a person we all respect. In spite of his 1963 accusation about Dr. King to the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce that Dr. King created dissension, confusion, and unrest by deliberately going in areas where colored people have been very well satisfied and whipping them up into a fervent heat of passion and hate for the white race, Delegate C. Maurice Weidmeyer argued the legislation will cost the state at least $80,000 in overtime payments to state employees who have to work on holidays. This argument would be rehashed throughout the nation in many state houses and the federal government when similar legislation was considered. Anyhow, it was reported that 8 of those delegates who had abstained before, many nervously fingering their voting switches until the last minute, swung around and voted for the bill after both black and white delegates made an impassioned pleas for the measure's passage. On the second ballot, the bill was approved 82 to 23 and was sent to the Senate for consideration. Delegate Webster's bill was assigned to Senate Finance, where a similar discussion about dropping Defenders Day from the list of legal holidays occurred, but ultimately they left Delegate Webster's bill intact and sent the bill to the floor. This body adopted the favorable committee report and voted unanimously, 29 to nothing, to pass the legislation. Delegate Webster's bill was signed into law by Governor Mandel as Chapter 440 of 1974 on April 30th, 1974, making Maryland the 3rd state to pass legislation of this nature. The law enshrined January 15th, Dr. King's actual birthday, as a legal holiday in Maryland and went into effect on July 1st, 1974. And in that same 2009 interview with the Baltimore Sun, Delegate Webster said, I just felt that the United States ought to recognize him. Nationally, efforts to recognize Dr. King's birthday as a federal holiday were not successful until 15 years after its initial introductions in 1968. In 1979, President Carter took up the mantle, but ultimately it was President Ronald Reagan who signed the bill on November 3rd, 1983, authorizing his birthday recognition as the federal holiday to be celebrated on the 3rd Monday of January, beginning in 1986. In 1994, President Bill Clinton signed Congressman John Lewis and Senator Harris Wofford's legislation into making the King holiday a national day of service. Here in Maryland, our law was updated that same year to expand the holiday to reflect the passage of federal legislation and one subsequent time to its current form that we now celebrate under today. In retrospect, the efforts here in Maryland had nowhere near the vitriol as some other states or even Congress, where both U.S. senators of North Carolina attempted to sully Dr. King's name by raising all sorts of details regarding Dr. King's relationships, outraging some of his colleagues. But I wanted to take note to one thing that was said by Kansas Senator Bob Dole, who silenced critics who raised arguments about cost when he said, "I suggest that they hurry back to their pocket calculators and estimate the cost of 300 years of slavery, followed by a century or more of economic, political, and social exclusion and discrimination. It would be 17 more years after President Reagan signed the bill until all 50 states observed this holiday. South Carolina was one of the last states to approve Dr. King's paid holiday for state employees in 2000. While all 50 states now honor Dr. King, efforts have continued to update the holiday in Alabama and Mississippi, where it's also Robert E. Lee Day, honoring the Confederate Civil War general whose birthday is January 19th. To this day, legislators in both states have attempted to bifurcate those holidays. So in closing, and I appreciate seeing that everyone is still awake, Dr. King asked us to remember that he tried to give his life serving others. He tried to love somebody, to be right on the war question, and to feed the hungry, to clothe those who were naked, to visit those who were in prison, to love and to serve humanity. This is how he wanted us to remember him and why we honor him today. So as we reflect on the years-long struggle within this legislative body to recognize this holiday, I hope that we are guided by the words of his 1967 speech, The Other America, because history will be obligated to remember you in the best light if you do this. And Dr. King said, we must realize that the time always is right to do right. Thank you.
Recognizing the good senator from the 26th district.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to congratulate and say to my colleague first how proud I am of you tonight. I have fond memories of my dad taking us to churches in Baltimore to listen to Dr. King preach at Shiloh Baptist and Cornerstone Christian Church, Park Heights Avenue. And I remember vividly his saying, my mom saying to us, you've got to be involved in the process. I remember when Parent Mitchell first began in the 3500 block of Park Heights Avenue, opened up his first office. She made us go down there and we had to carry peanuts. That's what, we didn't have a big budget. Peanuts, and make the bumper stickers green, red, and black with the stencils, and hang them up to dry and go from door to door. And I'll say what my colleague just said to me, years from now, for all of us who sit in this body, when we think we have been forgotten, somebody's going to talk about something that we thought was so small. And they're not, we think our labor is in vain, but all the names that you called tonight, it will not be in vain. I'll close with this. I have taught hundreds of seminary students homiletics and preaching down through the years, and if I were to grade you, I'd give you an A+. And I'd also like to tell you as a bishop that if you decide by tomorrow that you want a church, I have one to appoint you to. What a good job you've done. Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And Senator, the senator wanted to move to journalize.
And we journalize his remarks.
Without objection, absolutely, we will journalize that. And thank you for that reflection. Thank you. That was wonderful. Truly, it was wonderful. That was great. Thank you. It was enjoyable and clearly well researched. It was excellent. Truly excellent. Yes, Senator.
If I may say, in trying to put this together, I've never realized how important it is when we ask to have things journalized, the things that we vote on. Just pulling this information together, there were a lot of gaps. And I was telling the president earlier, thank goodness for the Enoch Pratt Library, thank goodness for Baltimore County Public Libraries, where I have library cards. And for those of you who don't know, if you just having that library card gives you access to the Baltimore Sun's collection, to the Afros collection. So there was a lot of firsthand accounts that I was using, that I was pulling from. I learned the importance of making certain that we talk to the media, because the reality is, in many of these quotes, black voices were not really heard, and I was curious, what were they saying? What were they thinking? But it wasn't documented. So as a history major, I really enjoyed putting this together, but again, it was a thing of wondering, well, how do you tell? History can be dry. And if you don't tell it right, people will end up going to sleep on you. So again, I was glad no one went to sleep, but this is what we did. Maryland, again, in all of the articles, they never talked about Maryland, so it brought about their curiosity.
It's fascinating.
And this whole journey for me allowed me to learn things about Dr. King that I wouldn't have learned anyhow, because again, I didn't want to get up there and make a fool of myself, so I had to know my subject. So thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Well said. Okay. Yes, recognizing Senator from Prince George's.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, in 1959, a group of us came together to begin to work in the civil rights movement. For those of you who don't know, the only place where Dr. King was allowed to visit in the state of Maryland was Baltimore. The senator is correct. And so we would go to Baltimore to sit with Dr. King as he preached at a facility on Monument Street. But the thing you need to know is that every summer we would meet with Dr. King in Washington for the workshops, because he was very adamant about nonviolence. I learned so much from the words of Dr. King, and he wasn't a tall man, he was short, but had a very interesting Southern drawl. We would go and sit with Dr. King, and he would have us to come to do the workshops during the summer. The thing that we found very interesting was behind the YWCA in an open field, a little field. And we would go there and sit. But what was interesting was that the backs of the benches had no backs. And he would stand there for hours with Hosea Williams and Jesse Jackson, a group of us, and he would talk to us and really appeal. He was just absolute, his voice was mesmerizing. He was just really something. Just his voice was very breathtaking. But when it was over, a group of us from Bowie State went up to talk with him, and I said, Dr. King, really, it's hot out here. The benches have no backs. Is there a reason why we're sitting in this heat? It's hot. Complaining, of course, that was me. But he said something to me that I've never forgotten. He was very famous for putting his finger up beside his face. And he would say, well, daughter, there's a reason why I'm having you all to sit here. He said, I want you to sit tall. He said, you know what? No one can ride your back when you're sitting and standing tall. And I've never forgotten that. But the experiences that I encountered with Dr. King were words I just can't even describe it. So you all see me walking around here, I do reflect back on my years of the civil rights movement. I was incarcerated up in Hagerstown. For those, of course, if you knew my father, I didn't stay long. But I have so much that I could talk about tonight. But I want you to know that I had that personal experience with Dr. King. And there were many ministers who didn't believe in Dr. King. But as I talked with my father, who was a minister, and I talked to people in my community about Dr. King, when I went back home during the summer to integrate establishments in Western Maryland and we were assigned to work on Route 1. That's where we worked. But it was a very exciting time for me. And so I'm very delighted. And I can also remember, if you all remember, most of you probably don't remember, but when Dr. King was assassinated, it was like, for these youngsters, it was dark. It got very dark. Do you all remember that? It was very, very dark. The whole day was dark. I could talk about Dr. King and my experiences in the civil rights movement, but it was something that I should never forget. And when I have an opportunity, I sit down and I talk with my family, my children, these youngsters who come here, I spend time talking to them about the importance of living right, doing right, treating people right. And I'm hoping each of us in this room will role model the principles of Dr. King. If we do that, this world will be so much better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Well said. Well said. All right, on an important day, I think we'll do a quorum call before we recess.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 40 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate of Maryland stand in recess until Tuesday, January 21st at 10 a.m.
Without objection, so ordered. Be safe, everyone. See you tomorrow.